Night 1. A hoof tapped against the window panes. It was 4 in the morning, and Fluttershy was standing outside of Applebloom's bedroom window. Her eyes was blank, and her smile slight enough to go virtually unnoticed. As Applebloom turned her head towards the window, Fluttershy raised a hoof and tapped against the glass again. She mouthed 4 words, her mouth barely moving.
"It's cold out here."
Applebloom pulled the covers over her head. She listened to the creaks and moans of the house settling. It would be dawn soon. The tapping started again. Night 2. Fluttershy was standing outside the window again. Her eyes didn't look quite right, but Applebloom would have been at a loss if asked to describe how. The dark red stain across the left side of Fluttershy's face contrasted harshly with her normally bright fur. She again tapped on the glass, again mouthed those 4 words.
"It's cold out here."
It was not cold. If anything, it was an unusually warm spring night. Applebloom pulled the covers up to her muzzle. A part of her wanted to open the window and let Fluttershy in, yet there was that whisper at the back of her young mind. No. Some part of Applebloom's mind said, "Do not open the window." So she merely sat there, staring into Fluttershy's slightly off eyes. Sleep seemed a remote possibility, but eventually it came. Applebloom dozed off just as the tapping stopped. Night 3. That night, Applebloom dreamed of toys, but not merely toys in general, but familiar plush or wooden faces from her childhood. She saw the wooden dolls Granny Smith had given her. The hand-me-downs from Big Macintosh and Applejack were also there, although they looked dingier than Applebloom remembered. She found herself digging through what seemed to be an unending pile of toys. What am I looking for? Applebloom wondered. Applebloom decided a minute later it must be King Paws, her favorite teddy bear. She remembered loving him immensely when she was a foal. But why couldn't she find him? Surely he must be somewhere. Surely this relic of Applebloom's foalhood was not so easily buried. But King Paws hadn't been buried, had he? He had gone missing. He had vanished from her life one spring night, and Applebloom had never been quite the same since. With this sudden realization, Applebloom started to sob. This rush of emotion yanked her out of her dream. Fluttershy was standing outside the window again. Clutched in her mouth was a tattered, old teddy bear. Night 4. Applebloom slept in Applejack's bed that night. She made up some excuse about nightmares, horribly aware of how immature she sounded. But her big sister was more than willing to switch bedrooms for the night. And of course Applebloom could not tell her the real reason why she was so distraught. Laying in bed, Applebloom started thinking about her foalhood for some reason. She recalled bright eyes peering out of an open wardrobe, shadows slingering across the floor, a husky sigh as she approached sleep. But those were not memories. Were they? Surely they were simply the remnants of past bad dreams. Applejack complained of a headache the next morning, but otherwise was none the worse for wear. Night 5. Apple Bloom was alone in the house. Her siblings and grandmother had left, the former due to a last-minute order, and the latter due to some business with a distant relative. They would not be back until late the next day. Prior to bed, Apple Bloom locked all the doors and windows in the house. She made a bed for herself on the living room couch. As one of the final repercussions, Apple Bloom took an old garden hoe from the barn. She laid it next to her makeshift bed within hoof's reach. It was raining outside. Apple Bloom listened to the raindrops splattering against the roof as she dozed off. She was convinced that she had heard something else. A footstep? A bang? A whisper? No, it was her imagination. Or perhaps the wind. Apple Bloom snuggled deeper under the blanket. More noises. They sounded as if they were coming from her bedroom, but that was impossible. The window was closed. But was it closed? Apple Bloom sat up, her heart pounding. She thought her locking down of the house had been through, but hadn't she intentionally avoided her bedroom, trusting the window to be closed? Yet any pony in her house could have opened it prior to their leaving. Even more noises, banging, and perhaps footsteps. And Apple Bloom was now certain they were coming from her room. She clutched the blanket, quivering. What was she going to do? Investigate? Flee? Or what if it was really her imagination, and the window was shut? If so, stepping out of the house may put her in more danger. Apple Bloom flew off the blanket and dropped to the floor. She had to know. Perhaps she was trotting to her own death, but it was better than simply waiting for some unknown horror to grab her. Apple Bloom took the garden hoe in her mouth before she headed upstairs. The house was silent, but Apple Bloom was not fooled. She approached her bedroom with caution. A part of her expected the door to fly open and for some awful creature to pounce. But having a weapon of sorts made Apple Bloom feel brave enough to gently push the door open without hesitation. The window was open. The wind was practically howling at this point. Leaves and rain was coming into the room through the opened window. Judging by the wicks and leaves that had accumulated under the window, it had been open for a while. But the open window was not the part that made Apple Bloom pause. It was not the cause of the scream that had climbed halfway up her throat. She saw it within seconds, and once she did, Apple Bloom thanked Celestia she had not stepped into the room. Something was in Apple Bloom's bed. A pony-shaped lump was visible under the covers. It was moving, its chest rising and falling with every breath. Apple Bloom thought she smelled something rotten and dusty, like the pages of a very old book, but she could have imagined it. Apple Bloom did not move, neither did the creature, save for its breathing. Apple Bloom realized the creature did not seem to realize she was there. It did not stir as she stood frozen in the doorway, nor did the wind and rain seem to disturb it. Apple Bloom eventually left the room, quietly shutting the door behind her. She went back downstairs, slower this time, as to not make too much noise. Apple Bloom ended up spending the night in the barn. When her family returned and demanded an explanation, she made up some half-believable story about a burglar. She refused to return to the house until all the rooms had been searched. As Apple Bloom had expected, no signs of a break-in were found, save for the open window in her bedroom. Apple Bloom returned to her bedroom after the search was complete. Other than a few dry leaves and a lingering smell of decay, There was no indication of anything having slept in her bed. However, Applejack found that one of the dresses in her wardrobe was covered in dirt, and what appeared to be a single bloody hoofprint. Applejack burned the dress in the fireplace later that day. Night 6. Applejack stayed up all night. She was sleepy to the point of near madness, but she refused to tear her eyes from the window. Fluttershy was watching her yet again. This time, she held a single piece of ripped cloth in her mouth. It was from the dress Applejack had burned. Applejack had buried the remains of it in the yard. Applejack thought of the eyes and the shadows that seemed to have haunted her early foalhood. She was now convinced she had also heard scratching noises, and perhaps tapping, but memories and nightmares had become interchangeable as of late. Applejack was not wholly convinced that they were not one and the same. The two sat locked in what seemed to be a staring contest until morning came. As soon as Celestia's light poked its way through the clouds, Fluttershy turned and trotted away. Applejack did not get up from her bed. It was minutes before she finally gave in to slumber. Night 7. Applejack had found the remains of the dress, and demanded to know why Applejack was burning her clothes. She also asked Applejack about her apparent sleeping troubles and her hostility towards Fluttershy. Applejack confessed nothing. She made excuses that were far from plausible. Applejack did not care if her sister was satisfied or not. A part of her hoped Applejack would send her away, perhaps a relative's house. At least Applejack would be far away from this nightmare if that happened. But Applejack had not sent her away. Applejack was certain Applejack was confronting Big Macintosh over the matter. But for the time being, she was forced into another staring contest with Fluttershy, or whatever loathsome creature wore Fluttershy's face outside her window. Fluttershy pressed her hoofs against the window. Her eyes seemed much larger than they should have been. She approached mournfully, as if denied some great conquest. Applejack could only stare for so long before she turned away. Fluttershy mouthed those 4 familiar words again.
It's cold out here,
she mouthed. Applejack stuck her head underneath the covers. She did not hear Fluttershy tapping at the window, but that mournful face had taken over her thoughts. Night 8. Applejack thought she might have been sleepwalking the previous night, for she had not awakened in her bed, but curled up in front of the closed window. Enough is enough, thought Applejack as she laid in bed. It might have seemed like a brave proclamation, but in truth, Applejack was terrified. Applejack was terrified. She again did not sleep, her eyes focused on the creature outside her window. Fluttershy returned Applejack's stare, licking her lips. Night 9. Earlier, Applejack had overheard her older siblings talking about doctors. She was aware they planned to send her to one. Whatever her siblings planned to do, Applejack was convinced her troubles would end soon enough. Applejack opened her window that night. She waited until the sun had almost sunk beneath the clouds before she did so. Her family had dozed off a little while ago. Convinced she was the only sleepless soul in the house, Applejack left her bedroom and went downstairs. In the kitchen, Applejack turned on an old gas lamp. She had also taken the sharpest knife she could find from the drawer, far more useful than the garden hose she'd chosen last time, but in this case, the purpose was not mere defense. Applejack waited until the darkness had truly fallen. Then she crept back to her room. the gas lamp held precautiously in one hoof and the knife handle in her mouth. Applebloom nuzzled the door open inch by inch, careful to minimize any noise she made. The creature was again lying in Applebloom's bed, the outline of its form underneath the covers. Applebloom placed the gas lamp on the floor. She froze as it touched the floor planks with the slightest thump, but she saw no evidence of the creature awakening at the sound. Applebloom held back a sigh of relief. Applebloom waited a few more minutes to make sure that the thing was asleep. She then approached the bed, knife still clutched tightly in her mouth. She was shaking, but she refused to hesitate in this moment of action. Applebloom reached the side of the bed and gently pressed both hooves against it as she eased herself up, carefully pulling herself onto the bed next to the creature. And then the creature moved. It was only a slight shift, as if it was trying to get comfortable, but it was enough to completely destroy Applebloom's nerve. Applebloom dropped the knife, a squeak of terror flying out of her mouth. She pressed both hooves against her mouth, but it was too late. The creature seemed to sense Applebloom was near. It moved in one swift, jerky motion, arching its back and bending its head in a way no normal pony could have managed. The creature gave a long growl, its body appearing to converse as it threw the covers off of it. Applebloom screamed, leaping from the bed. The creature leapt from the bed as well, moving in a way similar to that of a spider. It still resembled Fluttershy, but its neck was bent at an unnatural angle, as if broken. Its head was bent to one side and upside down. It regarded Applebloom with an upside-down grin, a grin extending far past what should have been possible. Its tongue hung limply from one side of its mouth, like that of an excited dog. It was panting in eagerness. Applejack rushed into the room, a gas lamp in hoof. "What the hell is going on here?" Applebloom said breathlessly, but Applebloom could only whimper, pointing a hoof at the creature that now stood in silent triumph near the window. Applejack's eyes widened with amusement and horror. "What in tarnation?" Applejack gasped. The creature moved its neck again, adjusting its head to a more normal position, its face no longer even looking like Fluttershy. It instead had morphed into some twisted mockery of the shy pony's face. The mouth stretched even further. It was breathing heavily, a tongue at least a foot long, hanging from its gaping mouth. Applejack tossed the gas lamp at the creature. It shattered upon impact, setting the vial on flames. All at once, the creature's twisted face started to burn. It now became a more accurate representation of Fluttershy, the flames starting to engulf it immediately. It started to burn away immediately. The creature objected loudly, alternating between screams nearly similar to those of Fluttershy and deep screeches that sounded like a tortured bird. The fur and flesh burned away at unnatural rate. The screams and screeches continued way longer than they should have ended. The last to surrender to the inferno was the light pink mane. After a few moments, all that remained was a charred skeleton. Epilogue. Applebloom and Applejack did not speak to each other. Neither spoke a word of the incident. Even after Applejack had buried the body in a secluded part of the farm. In fact, they both took the secret to their graves. Applebloom never again slept with her window open, even on particularly hot nights. Eventually, she was able to resume regular contact with the real Fluttershy, although it took months before she could ever look her in the eye, even after a while, and for a while after that, Applebloom would shudder every time Fluttershy smiled. The creature's smile would haunt her for the remainder of her days. Occasionally, On nights where it is particularly cold and the wind is close to howling, Apple Bloom will swear she hears tapping on her window, but she never gets up to check. She merely snuggles deeper under her covers, willing herself to enter dreamland quicker, but it is a little harder to ignore the voice. It whispers to her, seemingly inches away from her ear. It sounds very much like Fluttershy. It's cold